So now we're ready to begin actually creating some geometry. And the most common way one creates three-dimensional geometry in a mechanical CAD system like Fusion is to begin using two-dimensional sketches. It is certainly not the only way, but it is the most common, and as this is a beginning tutorial, we'll start with the most common way. To do this, you'll notice that there's some similarities between how we inserted a canvas and how we create a sketch. So let's begin. First off, we'll say create sketch. Just like with the canvas we inserted earlier, the system wants to know on which two-dimensional surface will we be sketching today. If you take your mouse up here to the view cube, hold your left mouse button and twist, you can see that Fusion has already turned on the three ground planes for your use since you don't have any of the geometry actually in your picture. Keep in mind that the canvas itself is not actually geometry. You cannot select it. So here again, I'm going to select that middle plane, that right-hand plane, and we are now sketching on that right-hand plane. By default, Fusion will turn the picture so that you're looking at this plane from the front, normal to the plane. And I want you to check a few things right now. You'll notice across the top that we have new toolbars. We are in the sketching environment. The sketching environment is a separate environment within most mechanical CAD softwares, all of them, of which I'm aware, and it's a very important one. You'll notice also that we have a sketch palette with some other commands and options, and most of you will have some sort of grid on your screen, which you can safely ignore for now. Before we go any further, I want you all to check and see if you have the option three-dimensional sketch active. If you do, turn it off. You can sketch in 3 dimensions in Fusion, but that again is an advanced technique and it's a tutorial for another day. So let's just turn that off. Keep it simple. The next thing I want you to do is double check to make sure that your settings are somewhat like mine. And you can see down here grids and snaps, there are two that I want you to turn off: snap to grid and incremental move. The snap to grid will force you to snap to every single one of these grid spaces, and it's not very convenient unless you're an architect. And incremental move, which will try to force you have all your angles, lengths, and everything be nice round numbers. And I'm a mechanical engineer, and I don't think that that is important, and I won't be using it today, and I would recommend that you turn it off. That again is here down in your grids and snaps. You can turn those off right now. And don't forget about the 3D sketch. Now, the very first thing we're going to do is going to draw a stick figure of our lamp, because this stick figure will be all we need to draw to be able to define some dimensions, some relationships between parts, and it will be the basis of all of our design. And I think most of you would be surprised to know that we're going to be spending 90% of our time on this sketch and in this sketching environment. And after that, creating the 3D dimensional geometry is almost automatic. Let's begin with a line. So we'll go to Create, Line. And the line command, just like all the other commands, will generally tell you what it needs to do if you just leave your mouse still for just a moment. It wants you to place the first point. So let's use that middle mouse button and zoom in closely to this area here, because I want to put my first line point somewhere around here. In fact, I want to put it directly above my origin. And to do this well, you'll notice that as I move closer to the origin, eventually my mouse will sort of snap to it. It'll snap to it and you'll see a little blue rectangle or square. And once I do that one singular time, anytime I come vertical to that spot, it'll snap vertically there. And that's very convenient. So I'm going to move my mouse there once. I'm not going to click on anything, just move it there for a moment, and then move away. And then I'm going to come down from the top, and you'll notice that when I get right in vertically in a line, right about there, I'll be vertically in a line to that origin point, and I can then click with my left mouse button and click and let go. My hand is no longer, my fingers are no longer pressing any mouse buttons. And I can move it away, and you can see that Fusion is wanting to create a line. It actually gives me the opportunity to put in lengths and even angles and all this kind of stuff, which you can do at another time, but I'm not going to do it now. I'm going to use that middle mouse button to zoom out a bit, and then I'm going to get up here to the top of this, and I'm going to be placing my next point. And I want to eyeball that sort of midline here, somewhere around here, and I want to have it be in line with this picture that I'm going to use the whole time now to create this geometry. I'm going to just click again and then let go. You'll notice that the line command just keeps going and keeps going and keeps going. So let's just keep going, and I'm going to hit something like this. Notice that as I go over the top of this button, I'll also infer that point. I don't really want to do that. I'll just make it a little bit longer just so that I don't. And you'll notice also that it just keeps going and keeps going and keeps going. Some of you will notice that there is a check mark, and I can hit that to stop this command, or I can just, if you like, hit the escape key. It's nothing you can see, but the line command will keep going until I hit that check mark, until I hit the escape key, and then I'm no longer in the line command. Not only was I able to infer the vertical constraint to there, you'll also notice that here, some of you probably got that perpendicular symbol as well. You'll also notice that these lines are blue. That has special significance inside of Fusion. And if you just watch, don't have to do this yourself if you're not inclined, you can see what I mean. Because they're blue, I can click on them and hold them, click and hold, and I can still move everything about. There's no problem moving everything anywhere I want it to move, and that is as intended. There's no problem with this. One thing you'll notice is that I cannot move this line to be non-perpendicular to this. That is because of this constraint. If I so wish, I can click on this constraint, hit the delete key, and it will be gone as well. And then I am more than welcome at that point to change also this angle. Now, none of that is what I wanted. I was quite happy with the way it was before. So it's important that we talk about another feature or function inside of Fusion that you'll be making heavy use of, especially in the beginning. This is the undo command. We have undo and redo here at the top left. If I hit the undo command a number of times, just keep hitting it until I get back to that original status that I quite liked, you'll see I can go back. This is really important. I see quite a lot of new users who make a command, make a mistake, and then they stop the entire sketch, delete the sketch, and begin anew. There's no need for this. You can just undo and redo as much as you like, and this will save you a lot of time and headache. I use the undo command constantly, and I've been using these tools for over 20 years. Now, let's continue, and we'll continue by adding some dimensions. Because although this is quite nice and it actually follows our picture very well, I'd like to actually have some dimensions in here and just show you how it's done. So number one, we're going to go create. And down here at the bottom, you'll see sketch dimension. By the way, there is a shortcut command called D for dimension. It's one of the ones I use, one of the only ones I use quite frequently. If you so choose, you may. Sketch dimension. And our dimensions are intelligent. So if we click two lines that are not parallel, we'll get an angle. If we click 2 points, we'll get a distance, and so on and so forth. If we click on circles, we'll get radii or diameters and this kind of thing. So it's quite nice. We can use one dimension command for just about everything. And in this particular case, I'm going to give a linear dimension to this line. Now you'll notice, depending on where I place my mouse, that positioning sort of changes, and I want to make sure that I get that angled one. So make sure you move your mouse around till you get that one. And if you don't like the way it looks, no panic. we just have to click it, and then I'm not pushing my mouse right now. And then when I push my mouse again, it places it. Depending on my settings, it is now asking me to define that length exactly. And in this particular case, I would like to have a nice round number. So I'm going to say 260 and then hit the enter key. You'll notice the dimension option is still active. And in this case, I'm going to press the escape key to get out of it. And I want to show you that this angled dimension is now placed. I can move it by holding the left mouse button. I can move it about all I want, and it's always going to be angled. So if you don't like where it was placed, like it was like this before, you can easily move it back here, make it look a little bit nicer, a little bit easier to see. Now, let's add another dimension. Let's add a sketch dimension under Create, Sketch Dimension. Let's add one up here. And here again, I want to get nice angled. It can be a little bit more difficult here. And I'm going to call this one 110, something like that. Here again, I'm going to press the escape key, get out of that command. I wouldn't have to do this normally, but we're trying to keep things simple today. Don't forget it. I'm going to place that nicely. So, there is one other thing I'd like to do. Well, there's actually a number of things I'd like to do. One of them, I'd like to make sure that this point is actually vertical to this point. I want to make sure of that. And the easiest way to do that is to make use of the constraints menu. Now, you can experiment with a lot of these, but let's begin with the very first one, vertical and horizontal. We can make any two entities or a line vertical or horizontal. And we do this, and this is important, press the escape key. 7 out of 10 of you will have something selected on your screen and you may not know it. Happens to me all the time. If you press the escape key, that selection will be null and void and you will not be selecting anything. This is important because if you have something selected and then click on the horizontal vertical command, you will then be forcing whatever it is you have selected to be horizontal or vertical to the second thing you select. But since you don't know what that is, it can have unexpected results. So also, almost as a matter of course, before I start a command, I hit the escape key, I have no selections active. And then I go and I say, horizontal and vertical is what I'd like to do. I would like to make this point horizontal or vertical with this point. And you'll notice in the moment where I do this, the command is still active, so I can hit escape and get out of it. But the moment where I do this, I now have a little horizontal vertical symbol here. And these are actually in pairs. So if I select one, the other will be highlighted and I can see where its partner is. Now you might be asking, why do we call this horizontal and vertical? Because horizontal and vertical are very different things, right? Well, that's because the idea of horizontal and vertical in CAD is very esoteric. Right now, these are vertical to one another. If I go to my view cube and just turn this, now they're horizontal to one another. And as a result, we have one command for both. Many systems actually have two separate commands, and ours will always snap to whatever is closest. So if I was actually closer for some reason to, well, now vertical, prior horizontal, it would have snapped to there. So always kind of get it right. Anyway. Now, the effect of this is to make sure this point can now no longer be anywhere except vertical to the origin. And that is exactly as is intended. Now, I drag everything around, so I'm going to do the undo button and get me back to where I was. This sets me up to do my next trick, which would be to create a dimension between here and here. And if I go to Create, Sketch Dimension, you can see that I can now dimension between this point and this point easily. And I can place this over here. And let's call that a nice round 125. Now, for those of you with very sharp eyes, you'll now see that this point has become black. And that is significant. Let's hit the escape key, and I will now try to move that point. I cannot move the point. I can rotate everything around it, but that point is now fully defined in space. And as a result, it is no longer white or blue, it is black. It is fully defined. There is nothing saying that your entities in a sketch must remain fully defined in all circumstances, but it is generally considered best practice because it means you thought of everything, and there are some strange situations where in certain cases things can flip around on you. So it's sort of a good idea, at least once you've got a better idea of what you want to do. So let's undo, get myself back to my positioning where I liked it. And let's talk about our next dimensioning problem. I would very much like to make sure this angle is consistent with this bottom floor, the imaginary floor. So let's try that. It's not going to work, and I'll show you why, but I want to show it to you. Let's do create, sketch dimension, and logically enough, I would select this line, and then I would go down and I would try to select perhaps this axis. And I can select and click all I want. I could do that, but it's not going to work. And this is due to a particular convention that we have inside of all Autodesk software. So let's hit the escape key and talk about it. Although I can see this in my sketch, it is not actually in the sketch. Perhaps if I rotate, we can envision this a little bit more clearly. This is the origin planes, and this is the y-axis. While they are visible, only my sketch is visible, and the origin is by default projected into the sketch. It is part of the sketch. For this reason, I could dimension to that origin, I could dimension to that. Autodesk wants us to always dimension things that are in the sketch and not outside of the sketch. This is because in the moment where I create a dimension between this line and this axis, I am creating a reference from this sketch to that external entity, which is the axis. I am referencing something outside of the sketch, and my sketch will never be able to rebuild without that axis. Now that is not a problem at all because this axis will always be there. But if you imagine we could reference this line to some other geometry in an assembly, that could be a problem because if that geometry disappears, this sketch could no longer rebuild properly. We'll be talking about those kind of relationships a little bit more. And for this reason, Autodesk wants to make sure that when we do these kind of external references that we are explicit about doing it. Not all CAD systems are this way, by the way. Some others would very easily allow me to create this angular dimension. But the downside of this is that people tend to create a lot of external references without even realizing it. And this causes a lot of problems later when you try to change designs or modify them in the future. For this reason, we will require you to explicitly project this line into the sketch. And this can be done in this way. Create a projection, and we are going to project something. We have a pop-up window that turns up, very similar to before. It will ask us what external geometry would we like to project, and we can select that axis. We can see it here selected, and then we can say OK. For some reason, we create a very small, very faint purple line. I would prefer this to be larger, quite honestly, but it is the way it is. And then I can easily go back and say create sketch dimension, select this line, and then this line is now easily selectable. I can select it, move my mouse to someplace convenient, drop that dimension, and I will call it just straight 67 degrees. The moment I did that, you'll notice that the entire sketch became black. If I hit the escape key and try to move something about, you'll see I am no longer able to do so because this sketch is fully constrained. That's quite nice. You can also see on this sketch itself, under the sketch folder, which came about in the moment where we created that sketch, you'll see a little lock. This also is an indication the sketch is fully constrained. One last thing I'd like to do is put this round on here. So let's go in and say modify. Modify allows us to modify existing sketch elements, and one of the things we'd like to do is put a fillet on there. Fillet command, I can select either this and this, or I can just select that corner. And I get an on-screen arrow, which will allow me to modify the fillet. And I want to kind of eyeball that so it looks about right, and it looks to me like 20 is about right. Maybe 25. Let's call it 20. I think 20 looks a little bit better. Either way, let's not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. This is a concept model, and I am an artiste, and I am working off a hand sketch. So I don't want to be hamstrung too much by my picture. If I hit that, I like that. You'll get a couple of errors or warnings that'll say, wait a minute, you have dimensions that are to that corner, and you have relationships that are to that corner. But Fusion actually goes and rebuilds a few of these. These are tangency commands to the fillet, and you actually have a rebuilt perpendicular command, which is no longer in the corner, but still these two are perpendicular, and so on and so forth, which is quite nice. I quite like that. Now, we're moving along quite quickly now, and we need to work on some other sketch elements. Let's do the lamp shade. If we do this, we can use the same command, create line. And here again, we can make use of the fact that we can edit everything easily. So don't make a big faff about this. Just go to the top corner, somewhere near it, and try to eyeball it. Click on that first point, click on that second point, click on that third point, click on that fourth point, and if you didn't get them all right, don't worry, they're all still blue, so you can grab them and move them around later. And pay attention to what happens here. As I zoom in closer, I will be able to snap to the original point, and I need to snap because in the moment where I do this, you'll notice, the sharp-eyed among you, that we have a picture, a color change. And I can prove this by turning off the canvas temporarily using the eyeball, and you can see that this is a color. This is an indication from Fusion that what I am dealing with is a closed profile, and these are extremely important. If I do not have a closed profile, I have an open profile, and I wouldn't be able to extrude or create 3D geometry based off of this. I would only get surfaces, if anything at all. So we do want to see that blue color. Keep in mind that although this is a blue color in space, it is not a plane, it is not a surface, and as a result I cannot sketch on it. It's not a surface like any other. But in any case, it is there. Ensure you have it. Now if you're not happy with where everything was placed, just hit the escape key, get out of the line command so that it's no longer active, and you can push and pull on these points to your heart's content. But here again, we're going to be adding constraints and dimensions to make everything sort of line up nicely. Let's begin with some of those constraints. So hit the escape key, make sure nothing is selected, and let's make the top and the bottom of our lampshade parallel. So we'll do parallel, U line are parallel with that line. So these two will now be parallel. However I pull and push them around, they will always remain parallel to one another. I can no longer make them non-parallel. That is very good. So let's also think about how we're going to place this on that line. So we're going to escape command. We're going to use the coincident command. And I will say U line are coincident to that point. And so from now on, if I hit the escape key again, you'll notice that I can push and pull on that all I want, but it's going to remain there. Now I'm going to undo that again, make sure we get back to where we were, something like that. And the next thing that comes to mind for me is that the orientation of this lamp is important. And I can think of a couple of ways to do this. This lamp and that end, they look to be parallel, or this could be perpendicular. So let's do perpendicular because we haven't done that one yet. So hit the escape key, say perpendicular, and make this bottom line perpendicular to that line. Now, keep in mind that because these two are parallel, that'll mean that this line is also perpendicular to that line. It's the geometry you learned back in grade school a long time ago. You'll get better at it, I promise. Now, there's one other thing I'd like to do. I'd like to make sure that the distance of this thing, that it's sort of the right height from up here. So let's hit the escape key, and let's create a sketch dimension. We're going to hit that line and this line. Now it is important actually to keep in mind what we're selecting. Some people like to select points, and while this can be handy, remember points, they're not, these lines are parallel to one another. So as a result, it's going to be much easier to do dimensions if you use the lines instead of the points. So we're going to place this over here, and I might push this out here, and I'm going to say that is going to be 50 high. Something like that. Just I like that number. And you'll see that turned black, so that's now fully defined. And the next thing I might want to do is say, what is the size of that diameter? And so I could click on that, and I could place that angled as such. And I might be able to say, that should be 110. Great. No problem. Now, there is one thing I want to make sure, that the left side and the right side are symmetrical, right? They don't have to be at the moment. If I press the escape key, I could move things around and be quite wonky. I don't want to have that at all. So let's make sure that this is sort of symmetrical, and a couple things happen at once. I'd like to have a center line. So let's draw that center line. Create line. And if I move my mouse slowly along this line right here, eventually you'll see that blue triangle turn up. That is the midpoint of that line. So now I can click on it, and I'm drawing my first line. If I do the same thing along the bottom line, patiently move along, you'll see that blue triangle turn up. That is the midpoint of the line. And if I just click again, I have a midpoint. And it's quite nice, because that midpoint will allow me to create a symmetry condition. The symmetry condition is going to happen through geometric proofs. I can actually use the symmetry command if I so wish. I could say escape, and I could say symmetry. You, dear line, are symmetrical to this line about this line. And that will actually achieve what I want, and then I can sort of pull things back into the shape that I want. The next thing I might want to do is say, what is the distance between the top and the bottom of this thing? So let's do that. Escape, make sure nothing's selected. Create, sketch dimension, line, and line, not point and point. And we can place this, and we can say that's an even 140. If you get an angular measurement out of this, that means that these two lines are not parallel. And if you recall, right at the beginning, I created a parallel constraint between these two. But if there was a slight difference here, the dimensioning command would give you a very small angle. And that's your clue that these two are actually not parallel. So you would want to escape out of the command, make sure that you have parallel constraint defined, and then redo the whole thing. We're still in the sketch dimension command. And sometimes it can be quite helpful if we get out of it and start pulling things around. And we can kind of get an idea, with some experience, what's missing. And what's missing in this case is actually just the size of the bottom of that lamp. So what should that be? So let's hit the escape key to make sure nothing's selected. Go to Create, Sketch Dimension, and then click on this line. Make sure we get the aligned dimension as we needed. And before you go in here, enter 252 or 250, let me show you a little trick. Don't touch anything. And if I hold my mouse over this dimension here for long enough, you'll see D7:110 millimeters. What you see there is the fact that this dimension has a parameter name inside of Fusion 360. It is D7, and its value right now is 110 millimeters. And indeed, every single dimension we have created is a parameter inside of Fusion with a particular name. If I were so inclined, I could put D7 as the parameter name that I wanted. And that would make this lower line always equal to D7. So in this case, 110. This is a unique and interesting way in which we can connect and relate parameters to each other, and it is the fundamental reason why such systems as Fusion 360 are called parametric CAD systems. But of course, we're not limited to only making things equal. I can even, if I so wish, use mathematical functions or even trigonometry functions in order to make relationships of all sorts. So if I wanted to make sure that this lower line was always 2/3 longer than the upper line, I could multiply D7 by 1.66. And then I would always have a relationship between these two where the one would be a value and the other would be 2/3 longer. You can see this reflected in the dimension name, which is shown as f of x, which is a function, and that function value is currently 182.60. If I press the escape key, and just as a matter of course, change this to 100, you'll notice that the value below also changes to 166. If I undo that, we should get back to about what we had before. And it looks like to me that indeed 110 is a bit long. Let's do 105. And it looks to be about right for me. At the same time, now that we've added that function, you'll notice that here at the top of the lampshade, also all these sketch entities are black, and as a result, everything is fully defined. Hitting the Fit key down at the bottom, I can see that really only one thing is left, and that are the legs. Now, we could, if we so desired, somehow try to sketch in 3 dimensions and make each leg separately. But we're going to be using patterns later to take advantage of the position of this relative to the origin to make use of that so we don't actually have to draw anything in 3 dimensions. We can do this very simply just by create, line, and then going from this point down to the origin, snapping to that again, and then pulling it out. Keep in mind that the picture here has a short leg because the picture is taken with an orthographic view plane, or perspective, a perspective view, so that back leg will appear shorter in our picture. So I'm going to pull it all the way down to the ground, and then I'm going to press the escape key, and I'm going to leave that blue. There's no need for me to define it, and you guys know how to do it now. So I'm going to leave it as is, also to prove that you don't need to do it. Now, whether you believe it or not, our lamp is almost finished. So this is a good point for us to leave the sketch by either clicking Finish Sketch here or to click Finish Sketch here. And when we do, we will leave the sketching environment. The sketch itself will remain visible, but all the dimensions will now disappear. If you feel you've made a mistake and would like to change this, then simply go to your Sketches folder, open this up and right mouse click on this and edit the sketch. This will bring you back into the same sketch and you can make any changes at your heart's content. You'll also notice down here in the timeline, we have a couple of entities. We have created a canvas and we have created a sketch. In the same way as I right mouse button here or right mouse button here, I can also just double click on the sketch entity here in the timeline and I will be able to make any changes that I wish. But we're fine with this the way it is. So remember, just go back to finish sketch. And this is a good point for us to make a break in the video.